Hey, Silent Pages fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe. Now stay with us. The story begins. It was a rare, sunlit morning in the city. One of those days when the air smells faintly of rain, yet carries the warmth of late spring. The streets, usually buzzing with the mechanical rhythm of hurried footsteps and distant car horns, felt almost suspended, as though the world had paused for a moment to breathe. Elena adjusted the strap of her bag, her fingers brushing against the worn leather, and glanced up at the ornate building that housed the little independent bookstore she had been meaning to visit. The sign above the door, slightly tilted, read Powell's Curiosities in faded gold lettering. She had walked past it countless times, yet today, drawn by some intangible pull, she stepped inside. The air inside was cooler, scented with old paper, polished wood, and the faintest trace of coffee lingering from a small corner cafe nestled beside the back wall. Rows of bookshelves stretched like silent sentinels, each laden with volumes of varying age and texture. Elena's eyes drifted from the leather-bound tomes to the stacks of colorful paperbacks, but it was the quiet corner near the window that caught her attention. A man knelt there, carefully examining a rare collection of books. His presence wasn't loud, but it filled the space with a subtle gravity. His deep blue eyes, when he glanced up, carried a mixture of focus and something unspoken, a kind of quiet intensity that made her chest tighten in an unexpected way. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but deliberate, as she approached the counter. "Do you have any new arrivals? Something unusual?" He looked up again, momentarily startled, before offering a small, polite nod. "Depends on what you consider unusual," he replied, his voice calm, yet carrying an undertone of curiosity. "Are you looking for fiction, history, or something more esoteric?" Elena smiled faintly, noticing the subtle furrow in his brow as he weighed his words. "Something that might make me think differently about the world," she said, a small laugh escaping her lips. "Or maybe something that makes the world feel a little less ordinary." He straightened, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead. "I think I can help with that," he said. "There's a collection of rare travel journals and letters from explorers here. Not many people come looking for them. Most prefer the comfort of familiar stories." Elena followed him through the narrow aisles, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. She noticed the care with which he handled the books, the way his fingers traced the worn spines, as if reading not just the words but the lives that had touched them. "You seem to know these books well," she commented, trying to sound casual. "I've always believed books have a way of finding the right person," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Sometimes they wait for years on a shelf until someone opens them and understands what they're trying to say." Their eyes met briefly, and Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in the way he spoke, in the precision of his movements, that suggested layers she couldn't immediately decipher. Not arrogance, not fear, but something closer to a wounded focus. A man who had seen too much and yet was still searching. "I like that," she said finally. "The idea that a book could wait for me, specifically." She glanced at his hands resting lightly on a weathered journal, noting the small scar along his knuckle. "Do you always look so serious? Or is it the books that make you that way?" A faint smile touched his lips, just enough to reveal a flicker of warmth. "Books don't judge," he replied. "They only reflect what's inside you." That can be unnerving at times. Elena felt herself drawn to the honesty in his words, and before she realized it, she had spoken more than she intended. "I'm Elena, by the way," she said, extending a hand lightly, almost unsure if he would take it. He looked at her hand for a brief moment, then shook it firmly. "Alexander," he said simply. The handshake was brief but electric, a spark of connection that neither could fully articulate. They moved to a nearby table, each carrying a book from the shelf. Elena opened hers, a collection of letters from a forgotten traveler, and began to read aloud softly, as if testing the sound of words in the air. Alexander listened, his blue eyes fixed on her, and for the first time that morning, he allowed a subtle sense of ease to enter his posture. They spent hours in that corner, discussing the lives of people long gone, the choices they had made, and the places they had seen. The conversation flowed effortlessly, punctuated by small gestures, a hand reaching to steady a falling book, a shared laugh at a particularly strange anecdote, a brief brush of fingers as they exchanged notes. As the afternoon sunlight waned, casting long shadows across the polished wood floor, Elena realized she hadn't noticed the passage of time at all. "I should go," she said reluctantly, closing her journal. "But, thank you. For the company. For everything." Alexander nodded, standing and offering a small, almost shy smile. "Perhaps we'll see each other again," he said, not as a question but as a quiet hope. Elena walked to the door, pausing briefly to glance back. Alexander was still there, arranging books on the table, but when he looked up and caught her gaze, there was a flicker of acknowledgement, a silent agreement that this meeting was not random, that it had significance neither of them fully understood yet. Outside, the air felt different, charged with a subtle promise. Elena adjusted her bag and began walking down the sun-dappled street, the memory of his blue eyes and the weight of the books in her hands lingering like a melody she couldn't shake. Somewhere behind her, the door of Powell's Curiosities swung gently on its hinges, a small bell tinkling faintly, as if marking the beginning of something inevitable. She didn't know it yet, but that single encounter would ripple through both their lives, shaping choices, stirring emotions, and drawing them together in ways neither could have anticipated. And somewhere in the quiet of the bookstore, Alexander watched her leave, a subtle, thoughtful smile playing at the corner of his lips. For him, too, the day had changed in ways he could not yet name. Days passed since Elena's first visit to Powell's Curiosities, yet the memory of Alexander's quiet presence lingered persistently in her mind. She found herself replaying the way he had handled each book, how his gaze seemed to understand more than the words on the pages. She tried to convince herself that it was just curiosity, the kind that always accompanies a first encounter with someone new. But curiosity, she quickly realized, was only the first layer. Her routine walks through the city became subtly oriented toward the little bookstore tucked between a coffee shop and a florist. Every time she passed the familiar gold letters, a small, almost imperceptible thrill rose in her chest. On the fourth day, she stopped. She didn't know why, perhaps hope, or perhaps some impulse too deep to name. But she pushed open the door and let the bell announce her arrival. Alexander was there, of course, not in the corner this time, but behind the counter, arranging a display of recently donated books. His blue eyes lifted briefly, meeting hers, and he offered a small nod, a subtle acknowledgement that he remembered her. That nod was enough to make Elena's chest tighten. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon," he said, his voice calm, but carrying that same undertone of interest she had noticed before. "I told you I was curious," Elena replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I wanted to see the collection you mentioned." Alexander gestured toward the far corner of the shop, where an array of journals and letters lay scattered across a low table. "I've set some aside for exploration," he said, the word deliberate, almost playful. Elena approached the table, running her fingers lightly over the covers, sensing the weight of history in each volume. Alexander watched quietly, almost reverently, as if the act of her touching the books was sacred in some unspoken way. "Have you always been so precise with your collection?" Elena asked after a moment, breaking the comfortable silence. He looked at her, considering. "I suppose. I've always valued care. Attention. Some things only reveal themselves to someone willing to notice the details." Elena nodded, understanding more than she expected. There was a softness in his eyes now, a hint of vulnerability she hadn't seen the first day. It made her feel oddly protective, yet she didn't move, didn't say more. They simply shared the silence, letting the rhythm of the bookstore wrap around them. Over the next few weeks, Elena found herself returning more often, not just for the books, but for the conversations that seemed to spring naturally between them. They discussed explorers and poets, the minor histories of forgotten towns, letters from faraway places that had once belonged to strangers. Each discussion was a small act of intimacy, a gradual layering of trust and understanding. One afternoon, a sudden rainstorm trapped Elena inside the bookstore. The streets glistened outside, slick with rain, and the soft patter against the windows created an unexpected cocoon of privacy. Alexander was rearranging a stack of books when she walked over. "You're still here," he said, not as a question but a statement. "I didn't plan to leave," she admitted, smiling softly. "The rain, it's nice. Makes the city feel smaller somehow." He nodded, seeming to understand. "I like the rain," he said. "It makes everything quiet. You notice things you don't usually see." Their conversation meandered, drifting from trivial observations to personal anecdotes, small glimpses into their respective pasts. Elena noticed the way his voice softened when he spoke about his childhood library visits, the way his gaze flicked toward a particular shelf when he mentioned a favorite author. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that there might be more behind those blue eyes than curiosity or intellect. One afternoon, as they cataloged a new donation of letters, Alexander paused. He held a small leather-bound journal in his hands, its edges frayed, its cover worn smooth. "This one," he said quietly, "was never meant to be read by just anyone. It belonged to a traveler who kept detailed accounts of the lives he passed. Most people wouldn't understand the value of such observations." Elena took the journal from him, feeling the weight of the paper in her hands. "Why are you showing it to me?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Because," he said, meeting her eyes, "I think you might." It was a simple statement, but it struck her with the force of clarity. This wasn't casual attention. There was purpose in his gestures, care in his words, and a subtle recognition that went beyond mere friendliness. They continued this rhythm for weeks, each encounter building upon the last. Small gestures became familiar, almost comforting. The way Alexander would leave a particular book on the counter for her to discover. The way Elena would bring a fresh coffee on rainy mornings and leave it beside the journals he was organizing. One evening, after the shop had closed and the city outside had fallen into its usual muted quiet, they lingered by the counter, cataloging a set of rare maps. Elena held a sheet in her hands, tracing the lines with her finger, and Alexander leaned over her shoulder, careful not to crowd her space. "You see," he said softly, "these lines aren't just geography. They're stories. They're paths taken by people who were alive, who feared and hoped and wondered just like we do." Elena looked up at him, her expression catching the faint glow of the overhead lamp. "I never thought of it that way," she admitted. "Not just lines on paper, but lives." Alexander nodded, and for a moment, silence settled again between them. It wasn't awkward or empty. It was a shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that something significant was unfolding. As she packed up her bag to leave, Elena felt a subtle reluctance to go, a magnetic pull she couldn't define. Alexander walked her to the door, the bell chiming softly above them. "See you tomorrow?" he asked, almost casually, though there was an unmistakable hope in his tone. Elena smiled, feeling the warmth of a connection she hadn't anticipated. "Yes," she said simply. "Tomorrow." And as she stepped back into the evening air, the city lights shimmering on wet pavement, she realized that something had shifted. The bookstore was no longer just a place of books. It had become a space of possibility, a beginning of something neither of them yet fully understood, but both felt profoundly. Days rolled into weeks, and the bond between Elena and Alexander deepened, though neither fully acknowledged the weight of it. The bookstore had become a quiet refuge where they could converse without pretense, where the hum of the city outside felt distant and irrelevant. Yet beneath their easy camaraderie, a subtle tension lingered, a shared wariness of revealing too much too soon, of letting past wounds define present moments. It was a gray Wednesday afternoon when the first crack of the past emerged. Elena had arrived to find Alexander seated in the far corner, staring at a set of old photographs he had brought from home. His usually composed posture was rigid, and a faint shadow flickered across his expression. "Alexander," Elena asked softly, approaching the table. He looked up, forcing a faint smile, but the blue in his eyes held something heavier than mere fatigue. "These," he began, holding up a photograph, "were taken during a trip I made years ago. Before everything changed." Elena leaned in, curiosity mingled with caution. "What happened?" he sighed, placing the photographs gently on the table. The images depicted a younger Alexander, smiling among strangers in a foreign city, a camera slung around his neck, notebooks tucked under his arm. But behind the smiles, Elena detected a subtle stiffness, an unnatural composure that spoke of burdens carried silently. "I lost people I shouldn't have," he said quietly. "Friends, mentors, even family in a way. I made mistakes, choices that cost me more than I realized at the time. And when I came back, I tried to bury it all under routines, under control, under books and collections." Elena listened, absorbing the depth of his confession. The man who appeared so composed, so measured, had carried invisible scars, wounds that had shaped the careful, deliberate way he moved through the world. "I understand," she said softly. "Sometimes, the past feels heavier when we try to hold it alone." He looked at her, and for the first time, the faintest tremor passed through his composed demeanor. "I've never shared this with anyone," he admitted. "Not like this. Not with someone I trust." Elena felt a rush of warmth, a quiet validation of the growing bond between them. She placed a hand lightly over his. "You can trust me," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." For the rest of that afternoon, the two of them lingered in the soft light of the shop, flipping through photographs, sharing fragments of memory, and revealing pieces of their inner selves that neither had dared to show before. It was in these small disclosures, in the delicate unspooling of private histories, that their connection began to take on a weight far beyond friendship. A week later, Elena found herself opening up about her own past. She had always been the quiet one, tending to the lives of others while keeping her own pains buried beneath layers of practicality and routine. But in the presence of Alexander, in the safe cocoon of the bookstore, she allowed herself to speak aloud the losses she had carried alone for so long. The sudden absence of a parent, the betrayal of a friend, the years of solitude that had left her heart wary of trusting anyone again. Alexander listened with unwavering attention, never interrupting, letting her voice fill the space around them. When she finally fell silent, exhausted by the weight of revelation, he reached across the counter and squeezed her hand gently. "You've endured so much," he said, his voice steady but soft. "And yet you're here, still capable of giving, of caring, of connecting. That is remarkable." Elena blinked back tears, feeling seen in a way that was entirely new. I've learned that sometimes survival isn't enough," she admitted. "Sometimes we need to let someone else in, even if it's terrifying." Their moments of shared vulnerability soon became a rhythm. They spoke of the things they feared, of the mistakes that haunted them, of the small joys they had hidden from the world. Each conversation, each quiet confession, wove a thread between them, a tapestry of trust that neither had anticipated but both found grounding. Yet, even as their bond deepened, shadows of the past crept unexpectedly into their lives. One rainy afternoon, a woman appeared at the bookstore. She was striking in appearance, impeccably dressed, with a poised demeanor that immediately commanded attention. Elena noticed Alexander stiffen at her presence, the warmth of his smile replaced by an almost imperceptible tension. "This is," he murmured under his breath, though Elena caught the flicker of recognition. The woman's gaze swept across the bookstore, settling on Alexander. "I need to speak with you," she said, her voice calm but edged with authority. Elena froze, a sense of unease prickling at the back of her neck. There was something about the interaction, subtle yet unmistakable, that hinted at unresolved history. Alexander's posture hardened, his eyes narrowing. "I don't think that's necessary," he said firmly. The woman persisted, her tone softening but unwavering. "I've reconsidered. There were circumstances, pressures I couldn't manage at the time, but I want to make things right." Alexander shook his head, the blue of his eyes darkening with resolve. "The past is behind us. There's nothing left to fix." Elena watched, heart pounding, as the brief exchange unfolded. The tension between them was palpable, a silent storm of unspoken words and lingering regrets. It was a reminder that even as she and Alexander built something delicate and new, the ghosts of the past could surface at any moment, testing the foundation they were constructing. After the woman left, Alexander exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. He looked at Elena, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. "You saw that," he said quietly. "I did," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the surge of questions in her mind. Are you okay?" He nodded, though she sensed the tension hadn't fully dissipated. "I will be," he said. "It's just complicated." That night, as Elena walked home through the rain-slicked streets, she reflected on the fragile balance of their growing connection. Trust, she realized, was not simply given. It was continually tested, honed, and reinforced. And though the shadows of the past loomed, the bond she felt with Alexander had begun to anchor her in a way she hadn't expected. In the weeks that followed, their days filled with small rituals, morning coffee deliveries, shared discoveries among dusty shelves, quiet moments of laughter over trivial observations. Each gesture, no matter how minor, strengthened their connection. And slowly, the unspoken understanding between them grew, a delicate recognition that what they were building was rare, fragile, and profoundly real. Yet, beneath the surface, both knew that the true tests were still to come. The past, with its lingering ghosts and unanswered questions, had not fully released its grip. And in the quiet of the bookstore, as rain continued to fall outside, they each silently wondered, would the trust they were forging withstand the inevitable storms ahead? The days grew shorter as autumn settled over the city, painting the streets in shades of amber and gold. Inside the bookstore, the air was thick with the comforting scent of old pages, yet a subtle tension lingered between Elena and Alexander. Their growing connection, though resilient, was beginning to face its first true tests, not from strangers, but from the echoes of lives they had tried to leave behind. It began subtly, with misplaced hesitation. Alexander would pause when Elena approached certain topics, or glance at the door expectantly, as if expecting someone from his past to enter. Elena noticed the way his jaw tightened when a familiar name appeared in conversation, or the fleeting shadow that crossed his face when a photograph or letter resurfaced from the archives he tended with obsessive care. One chilly morning, as rain pattered against the large front windows, a delivery arrived. Elena signed for it without thinking, curious at the weight and oddity of the package. When she opened the plain brown box, she found a stack of letters and a photograph, each addressed to Alexander. The handwriting was precise, almost meticulous, but carried an urgency that unsettled her. He returned from the back room, wiping his hands on a ragged towel, and froze when he saw the package. His blue eyes darkened with a mixture of recognition and dread. Those, he murmured, bending over the box. I thought I had destroyed these years ago. Elena hesitated, unsure whether to ask, and finally settled for a quiet, "What is it?" Alexander exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Old correspondence," he said, though his voice betrayed the weight it carried. "Letters from someone I was once close to, someone who became more than a friend. They never stopped trying to reach me, even after everything ended." The admission hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. Elena's stomach tightened. She had anticipated challenges, but the sudden intrusion of his past brought an unfamiliar unease. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Do you want me to read them?" "No," Alexander said immediately, a faint edge in his tone. "These are private. They're from a life I thought I had left behind." Elena nodded, recognizing both the firmness and the fragility in his response. She stepped back, letting him handle the letters as he saw fit, and returned to organizing the new arrivals on the shelves. But the quiet hum of activity could not erase the awareness that something unresolved lingered between them, a shadow that had yet to fully reveal itself. That evening, as the city streetlights flickered on and the rain softened into a drizzle, Elena stayed late, cataloging newly donated books. Alexander approached, his expression guarded. "I need to tell you something," he began, the words slow and deliberate. "It's about these letters. About what they represent." Elena set down a book, sensing the gravity in his tone. "Go on," she said softly. He ran a hand across his face, leaning against the counter. "Years ago, before we met, I made choices that hurt someone who trusted me completely. I thought I had moved on, that I had learned from my mistakes, but these letters suggest otherwise. That person still believes I owe them something, still expects something from me." Elena felt a pang of empathy, though it came tangled with fear. "And how do you feel about that now?" Alexander hesitated, then exhaled. "Conflicted. I don't want to hurt anyone, not again. But I can't let the past control my present. I can't allow it to take from what I have now, with you." The words hung between them, unspoken but understood. Trust, they realized, was a living, breathing thing, constantly tested, constantly reinforced. And the shadows of former mistakes would not simply vanish. They had to be faced, acknowledged, and integrated into the present, if their bond was to survive. The following days brought subtle, yet persistent challenges. Small misunderstandings arose, often from innocent remarks, or from memories that resurfaced too quickly. One afternoon, Elena found herself waiting in the bookstore for Alexander to return from a brief errand. She noticed the lingering aroma of a particular cologne, unfamiliar yet faintly reminiscent of the past he had tried to leave behind. Her chest tightened, a whisper of doubt forming. When he returned, she managed a tentative smile, though the tension was palpable. "Everything okay?" she asked, attempting casualness. "Yes," he replied, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something unsaid. They lingered across the counter, two people bound by trust, yet acutely aware of the fragility of that trust in the face of external echoes. That evening, Alexander finally spoke in the quiet of the bookstore, their hands brushing as they shelved a set of new arrivals. "I don't expect perfection from us," he admitted. "I only hope that we continue to choose each other, even when the past whispers doubts, even when fear makes us second-guess ourselves." Elena felt a swell of emotion, understanding the vulnerability in his admission. "I choose you," she whispered, the words carrying weight far beyond their simplicity. "Even when it's hard, even when it's scary." Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the tension eased. Alexander faced his past in measured steps, responding to old correspondences without letting them dominate his present. Elena, in turn, learned that love required both courage and patience, that the heart must sometimes endure discomfort to find clarity. The bookstore became their sanctuary again, the haven where trust was nurtured through shared labor and quiet companionship. They discovered joy in small rituals, brewing coffee in the mornings, cataloging donations, and reading aloud to children who visited the shop after school. Each moment, however mundane, became a thread weaving them closer together. One rainy afternoon, as a storm swept across the city, the bookstore door jingled with the arrival of a young boy clutching a worn notebook. He shyly approached the counter, asking for help with a school project. Elena knelt beside him, guiding his small hands as they traced letters and numbers. Alexander watched, a quiet smile playing at his lips, recognizing the reflection of both care and patience he saw mirrored in Elena. It was in moments like these, unscripted, gentle, and shared, that their connection solidified. The past was still present, but it no longer dictated their actions. They were learning to navigate life together, one choice at a time, reinforcing the trust they had built with tangible gestures and quiet assurances. As the storm subsided and the first rays of sun pierced through the clouds, Alexander and Elena stepped outside, letting the cool, crisp air wash over them. Leaves swirled at their feet, carried by the lingering wind, a reminder that life, like the seasons, was ever-changing, ever moving forward. Elena looked at him, her eyes reflecting both resolve and warmth. "Whatever comes," she said, "we face it together. No matter the shadows, no matter the echoes." Alexander nodded, taking her hand in his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Together," he affirmed, the single word resonating with promise, with commitment, and with the quiet understanding that their journey, though still uncertain, was theirs to navigate side by side. And in that moment, as sunlight danced across the wet pavement and the city stirred around them, both felt a sense of quiet triumph. Not over the past, nor over each other, but over the fear that had once threatened to keep them apart. They had chosen trust. They had chosen connection. And in that choice, they found the first true foundation of what could become something lasting, something resilient, something real. The bookstore had begun to feel like a small world of its own, a cocoon against the chaos of life outside. Yet even within its comforting walls, the ripples of the past could not be completely ignored. Alexander and Elena had built a rhythm, shared mornings cataloging books, afternoons reading to the neighborhood children, evenings spent organizing small community events. Still, the weight of what they had each endured remained, sometimes surfacing in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. One morning, as the autumn light filtered through the tall windows, Alexander noticed a subtle shift in Elena's demeanor. She moved slower than usual, her gaze occasionally drifting toward the street outside, her hands lingering on the spines of books as if seeking grounding. Concern knotted his chest. "Elena," he asked softly, leaning on the counter near her, "is something wrong?" She paused, closing the book she had been examining. "It's nothing," she replied quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But Alexander knew better. He had come to recognize the subtleties, the quiet signs that something unspoken had surfaced. Before he could press further, the bell above the door jingled sharply. A woman stepped inside, tall and composed, with a presence that seemed to shift the room's atmosphere. Her hair was platinum blonde, impeccably styled, and she wore an expensive overcoat that contrasted sharply with the cozy familiarity of the bookstore. Alexander's heart skipped a beat. He froze, a deep sense of unease settling over him. "Sophia," he murmured, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Elena instinctively stepped back, her hand brushing the edge of the counter as she observed the interaction quietly. She hadn't met her before, but she sensed the tension radiating from Alexander. The woman's eyes, sharp and calculating, fixed on him immediately. "I need to talk to you." Sophia's voice was soft, but carried an unmistakable authority. Alexander's jaw tightened. "I don't think there's anything left to discuss," he said, his voice controlled but cold. Sophia took a deliberate step closer. "I've reconsidered everything," she said, her tone almost vulnerable, "and I want to fix what I broke. You were always right. I was wrong to leave." Alexander shook his head firmly. "There's nothing to fix. You made your choice then. I've made mine now." Elena, though careful to remain unnoticed, felt her chest tighten. She watched the exchange, recognizing both the history and the unspoken weight of Alexander's past. The presence of Sophia was more than a disruption. It was a test, one that seemed designed to awaken old fears and insecurities. The conversation ended as abruptly as it had started, Sophia leaving with a whispered, "You'll regret this," hanging in the air. Alexander's shoulders sagged slightly after the door closed, the residual tension making the bookstore feel heavier than before. Elena remained in the back room, holding a copy of The Alchemist she had been reading for comfort. The words she loved, about desire, destiny, and the universe conspiring to help you achieve your heart's true wish, felt almost cruel now. She wondered if she was truly enough for Alexander, or if she was merely a temporary balm for the scars left behind by others. The following days were tense. Elena found herself questioning every interaction, every small gesture. Did he truly care for her, or was she just a placeholder while old ghosts lingered in the corners of his life? Each time Alexander smiled at her or handed her a coffee, she felt a flicker of reassurance, only to have it undermined by the memory of Sophia's visit. One evening, as rain fell steadily outside, Elena made a decision. She needed distance, clarity, and a chance to reaffirm her own sense of self. She drafted a resignation letter to the bookstore manager, careful to explain her intentions clearly yet without bitterness. Her plan was simple: leave the city, leave the reminders of Alexander's past behind, and pursue an opportunity she had been offered months earlier in a non-profit organization focused on education and community work in a neighboring state. The next morning, she shared her decision with her closest friend, who reacted with frustration and concern. "You can't just run away because of a visit from some ex," her friend said sharply. "You've built something here, something meaningful. Don't let fear drive your choices." Elena listened, acknowledging the concern, but her resolve remained firm. "It's not about fear of losing him," she replied. "It's about protecting myself, ensuring I don't lose myself in someone else's unresolved past. I need to figure out who I am, without being defined by his history or anyone else's mistakes." Later that evening, after the bookstore had closed and the city streets were quiet under the drizzle, Elena slipped inside one last time. She placed The Alchemist on the small reading table Alexander often used, along with a short note: "Find your treasure." No explanation, no farewell, just a seed of hope for him to discover on his own. She took the book press he had given her, packed a small suitcase, and left, the quiet weight of her departure echoing in the empty aisles. Alexander arrived at the bookstore days later, as usual, expecting to find Elena. Instead, he was met by his friend behind the counter, who slid The Alchemist toward him. The note was brief, but its meaning was clear. For the first time, Alexander felt a loss far deeper than anything Sophia had ever caused. This was not about the past. It was about someone he had allowed himself to care for, someone who had chosen to step away rather than compromise her own worth. The city outside moved on, indifferent to the small heartbreaks and departures that had quietly shaped its streets. Alexander's search began almost immediately. He retraced every path she had taken through the city, every cafe, every library, every nook she had once favored. He asked strangers, checked community boards, and revisited familiar corners. But for days, there was no sign, only the weight of absence pressing against him. Finally, he remembered a detail she had once shared casually: a job offer at a non-profit educational organization in a city to the north. It was the only lead he had, a fragile thread connecting him to her. He set out immediately, driving through rain and fog, clutching The Alchemist like a talisman, the words on its cover echoing with unintended resonance. When he arrived, the building was unassuming, its walls pale yellow, filled with the soft chatter of children. And then he heard her voice, gentle, confident, vibrant, reading to a group of young listeners. Every syllable, every intonation, carried the warmth and presence he had grown to cherish. He stood frozen at the doorway, recognizing the depth of what he had lost, and yet understanding that he had found something irreplaceable, a reminder of what it meant to choose someone, to fight for connection, and to face the consequences of letting the past linger too long. And in that moment, he knew that the journey to win her back, to prove his sincerity, had just begun. The nonprofit's small hall buzzed with the sounds of children learning, drawing, and sharing stories. Alexander lingered at the doorway, clutching The Alchemist tightly, unsure of how to approach. He wanted to call out, to rush forward and explain, but something restrained him, the fear that one wrong step could undo everything, that Elena might see him as a man trying to reclaim what she had deliberately left behind. He observed her from afar, noting how naturally she moved among the children, her voice steady and encouraging. She read aloud with such care, the words dancing across her face in expressions of empathy and excitement. Every now and then, a small hand would reach out, grabbing her attention, and she would bend down, her smile radiating warmth. In those moments, Alexander realized just how deeply he had admired her, not for the comfort she had offered him in the past, but for the person she was when she stood independently, unguarded, and wholly present. Taking a slow breath, he stepped into the room. The sound of his shoes against the polished floor caught the attention of a few children, and for a brief instant, their curious eyes turned toward him. He held up the book as a silent gesture, hoping the symbol of their shared past, the first gift of trust and hope, would communicate his intentions before words ever did. Elena paused mid-sentence, her eyes locking onto his. The reaction was subtle, a flicker of surprise and caution, her hands tightening around the book in her lap. She did not speak immediately, choosing instead to study him as if weighing every possible motive behind his presence. Alexander's heart pounded. He had rehearsed countless scenarios for this moment, yet nothing had prepared him for the raw authenticity of her gaze. Finally, he approached, each step deliberate, controlled by a need to convey sincerity above all else. When he reached a point only a few feet away, he lowered his voice, just enough for her to hear. "Elena, I didn't know where you'd gone. I didn't know if I'd ever see you again, he admitted, voice trembling slightly. I should have told you everything earlier, but I was afraid. Afraid that my past mistakes would cost me the chance to stand by you, not just as someone from your past, but as someone you could trust now. She remained seated, silent, her expression unreadable, though the tension in her posture betrayed the storm of thoughts within her. He continued, emboldened by the fact that she was still listening. I've realized that it wasn't about the past. It was never about Sophia or any mistake I made. It's about you. You. You are the reason I want to be better, the reason I hope for more. I've searched, not because I couldn't live without you, but because I knew I would never forgive myself if I didn't at least try to make this right. The children around them had resumed their activities, sensing the gravity of the moment between the adults yet allowing the room to feel normal. Elena's fingers brushed the edge of the alchemist, her eyes softening ever so slightly. Alexander, she said finally, her voice low, careful, you don't get to just show up and erase the choices I made. You don't get to undo the distance I created for myself. You can't demand trust back like it's something you can reclaim in an instant. I know, he said immediately, his tone steady and resolute. I'm not asking for instant forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to show you that I am here, that I have changed, and that I am willing to prove it, however long it takes. Whatever you need. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she nodded, a subtle acceptance that the conversation could begin, but nothing more. It was not victory, nor reconciliation, merely the opening of a path forward. Over the following weeks, Alexander and Elena rebuilt contact slowly. He attended storytime sessions regularly, sometimes reading aloud, sometimes organizing activities, always careful not to impose, letting her set the pace. They shared small lunches afterward, discussing books, ideas for new programs, and occasional glimpses into their personal lives. Gradually, the walls of wariness she had constructed began to soften, not because she was naive, but because she witnessed his consistent presence, his dedication, and his willingness to respect her boundaries. There were moments of tension, inevitably. Elena would bring up frustrations about the organization, budget challenges, or unexpected responsibilities, and Alexander would find himself learning patience in ways he hadn't before. He had once been a man used to control, accustomed to managing outcomes, but here, he was forced to listen, to adapt, and to negotiate. A different kind of growth, one that mirrored the emotional labor Elena had invested in healing her own wounds. One crisp morning, while delivering books to a local community center in a nearby neighborhood, they walked together through a narrow lane lined with the golden hues of autumn leaves. Alexander carried a small crate. Elena balanced a stack of picture books in her arms. I've been thinking, Elena said, her voice soft but deliberate, about how far we've come, how much has happened since that day in the rain. She glanced at him, eyes catching the sunlight. We've both grown, but there's still a lot to figure out. He nodded, and I want to figure it out with you. Not rushing, not assuming anything, but together. She smiled faintly, a mixture of warmth and guarded caution. Step by step, she murmured. Yes, he agreed. Step by step. The afternoon unfolded quietly, punctuated by the laughter of children, the smell of autumn air, and the shared satisfaction of contributing to something meaningful. They reached the community center, unloaded the books, and watched as the children explored the new arrivals with wide eyes and eager hands. Alexander felt a quiet contentment, a sense of purpose beyond personal gain. He understood now that the foundation of trust, love, and partnership required consistent care, attention, and selflessness. Not grand gestures, not dramatic declarations, but the small, repeated acts of showing up. Later that evening, they returned to the office of the nonprofit. A modest space filled with shelves, colorful posters, and stacks of books, it had become their shared ground, a place of work, growth, and increasingly, mutual understanding. Alexander and Elena organized materials for an upcoming reading event, their hands brushing occasionally as they reached for the same item. Each touch, brief and deliberate, carried the weight of past misunderstandings and the promise of future connection. As the day faded, Elena paused by the window, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Alexander approached quietly, standing beside her, offering a presence more than words. Do you ever wonder if we'll get it right? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her, eyes earnest, and replied, we already have. Every moment we show up for each other, every choice to trust, every step forward, that's getting it right. We don't need perfection. We need each other, consistently. A quiet smile graced her lips. The vulnerability in the admission, the recognition of shared effort, settled between them like a warm presence. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to imagine a future where past shadows didn't dictate her choices, where growth and love could coexist. And so, as night fell and the city hummed softly, Alexander and Elena began a new chapter, not defined by urgency or dramatic gestures, but by steady, deliberate acts of care, respect, and attention to the delicate, evolving connection between them. In that moment, the foundation of something enduring was being laid, step by step, book by book, conversation by conversation, anchored in mutual trust and the shared commitment to nurture not only the community they served but the fragile, precious bond forming quietly between them. The days that followed brought a rhythm to their collaboration that neither had anticipated but both had grown to rely upon. Elena had carved out a corner of the nonprofit office for herself, a small space with neatly stacked books, a laptop, and a few personal mementos that reminded her of the journey she had endured. Alexander had claimed the larger desk near the window, the sunlight streaming and illuminating the scattered plans, donation forms, and notes about the mobile library's expanding routes. Their interactions were deliberate, yet natural. Each morning, they arrived at the same time, exchanged quick greetings, and began coordinating logistics for the week's programs. It was not always easy. Funding applications were complex, volunteers occasionally unreliable, and unexpected setbacks in delivery schedules of donated materials tested their patience. Yet, the shared burden became a bridge between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that they were building something larger than themselves, and that their connection had purpose beyond mere companionship. One particular morning, a crisis arose. The local elementary school had requested a mobile library visit for a week earlier than planned due to a community literacy initiative. The timing coincided with a sudden shortage in the foundation's volunteer roster, leaving them scrambling to ensure the visit could happen without compromising quality. Elena and Alexander worked side by side, coordinating delivery schedules, adjusting routes, and calling volunteers personally. The tension in the office was palpable, yet there was an unspoken trust between them. Alexander noticed how she remained calm under pressure, delegating tasks efficiently, and providing guidance to temporary volunteers. Her competence was magnetic, drawing him into the flow of her energy rather than intimidating him. During a brief lull, Alexander leaned against the doorway, observing Elena as she organized a stack of storybooks for the children. "You know," he said softly, "I don't think I've ever seen anyone handle this kind of chaos with such grace." She glanced up, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Grace? More like stubbornness, and perhaps a little insanity. He chuckled, feeling the warmth of familiarity creep into the room. "Stubbornness suits you," he said, meeting her eyes. The moment lingered, charged with the subtle undertones of unspoken feelings. The mobile library visit itself became a test of their growing partnership. The team arrived at the school, setting up tents, tables, and book displays in the playground. Children flocked immediately, their energy infectious, their laughter blending with the rustling of pages. Elena moved seamlessly from station to station, guiding storytime sessions, helping a hesitant child choose a book, and celebrating small victories when students expressed enthusiasm for reading. Alexander, more reserved but equally committed, assisted behind the scenes, ensuring the books were organized, volunteers were briefed, and logistical challenges were handled swiftly. By the end of the day, both were exhausted, yet there was a quiet satisfaction that filled the space between them. They shared a few moments alone on the empty playground as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in warm hues of amber and rose. "You were incredible today," Alexander said, his voice steady yet soft. "You make this, all of it, feel possible." Elena looked at him, her expression open, vulnerable yet resilient. "It's not just me," she replied. "It's you too. I trust you. You've shown me that you're here for more than just words, Alexander. That means more than you might realize." He felt the gravity of her statement, the depth of trust it carried. In that quiet exchange, the walls built over years of disappointment and fear began to crumble, replaced with the fragile, yet potent, hope of mutual commitment. The days following the school visit saw them working even more closely together. They brainstormed new initiatives, a storytelling night for immigrant families, workshops for parents to encourage reading at home, and plans to expand the mobile library to neighboring counties. Each project required compromise, negotiation, and a delicate balance of leadership, an exercise that, while professionally demanding, brought their personal connection to new heights. One evening, as they sorted books in the nonprofit storage room, a gentle rain tapping against the windows, Alexander paused. "Elena, can I ask you something personal?" She looked up from a pile of picture books, curiosity in her gaze. "Of course. Do you ever wonder if we're rushing?" That maybe we're letting the work and the shared purpose replace what we should be feeling or trying to feel between us. Elena considered his words, placing a book carefully on the shelf. I've wondered that, she admitted. But then I remember why I came here in the first place. Not just for the children, or the programs, or the foundation, but for the possibility of finding someone who understands why I care, why I need to make a difference. And I see that in you. I see it every day. Alexander's chest tightened. Her words, simple yet profound, affirmed what he had feared yet hoped, that their connection was not just circumstantial or convenient, but deeply rooted in shared values, experiences, and emotional resonance. The next challenge came unexpectedly. During a fundraising meeting with a potential donor, a misunderstanding about budget allocations and project priorities led to tension. The donor questioned their capacity to manage multiple initiatives simultaneously, suggesting that the foundation might overextend itself. Alexander and Elena exchanged glances, each aware that this moment could determine the future of the projects they had so carefully nurtured. Elena took the lead, presenting clear data on volunteer engagement, projected growth, and community impact. Alexander added context on funding logistics and sustainability plans. The synergy in their presentation was undeniable. The combination of her detailed knowledge and his strategic foresight convinced the donor of the foundation's competence. The funding was secured, and they left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose and mutual respect. In the weeks that followed, they found small moments of intimacy amid the chaos, shared coffee breaks, quick lunches in quiet cafes, and evenings spent cataloging books together in the softly lit office. Each encounter, no matter how mundane, became an affirmation of their growing bond. They were no longer merely colleagues, no longer just two individuals healing in parallel. They were partners navigating challenges side by side. One rainy afternoon, as the nonprofit's volunteers set up for another community event, Alexander and Elena stood by the window, watching the children arrive, umbrellas bobbing in the drizzle. Alexander reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. Step by step, he whispered, echoing the promise they had made months earlier. She smiled, a warmth that had been absent for so long. Step by step, she repeated. In that moment, the foundation of trust, commitment, and shared purpose was solidified, not with grand declarations, but with consistent presence, mutual respect, and the quiet understanding that growth, whether personal or professional, required patience, persistence, and the willingness to face challenges together. The work ahead was still daunting, expanding programs, managing volunteers, and addressing the unexpected crises that inevitably arose. But Alexander and Elena now faced it as a united front, strengthened not only by the successes they achieved, but by the empathy, patience, and trust that had been carefully cultivated over time. By the end of the day, the rain had stopped. Children left with stacks of books and excited chatter. Volunteers cleaned up the area, and the office settled into a calm evening hum. Alexander and Elena lingered, organizing leftover materials and sharing quiet conversation. You know, Alexander said, setting down a box of picture books, I never imagined that helping others could feel this full, like we're really making a difference. Elena nodded, looking at him with a subtle softness. It's not just about the difference we make in the community, she said. It's about the difference we make in each other. And that matters just as much. Alexander's hand found hers, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had undertaken and the steps still to come. In that simple gesture, everything else, the fear, the hesitation, the past regrets, fell away, leaving only the promise of continued partnership, shared challenges, and a bond forged in trust, empathy, and mutual purpose. As they left the office that evening, walking side by side through the quiet streets, the city lights reflecting in puddles from the earlier rain, both felt a renewed sense of hope. The path ahead was uncertain, full of obstacles and surprises, yet it was theirs to navigate together. And for the first time in a long time, both of them embraced that uncertainty with open hearts, ready to face whatever came next, step by deliberate step. The morning light spilled through the tall windows of the small East Portland office, illuminating the shelves lined with books, office supplies, and colorful posters announcing upcoming programs. Elena arrived first, her steps purposeful yet calm, a cup of coffee in hand. Alexander soon followed, carrying his laptop bag and a folder stuffed with notes and project proposals. The air between them was quiet but charged with the familiar energy of shared purpose, an energy that had been steadily growing over weeks of collaboration. Morning, Alexander greeted, setting his bag down and glancing at the schedule pinned to the wall. I've reviewed the budget projections from last month. There's room to expand the mobile library routes, but we need to confirm volunteer availability first. Elena nodded, placing her coffee on the desk. I've already emailed the core group. Most of them can adjust for additional hours, and a few new volunteers reached out after last weekend's community event. It looks promising. She paused, her fingers lingering on a stack of donated books. I've also drafted a preliminary plan for a reading workshop at the Women's Center. If we start next month, we could integrate it with the Literacy Initiative for Immigrant Families. Alexander raised his eyebrows, impressed. You think we can handle both? The mobile library expansion and the new workshops? She gave a small, confident smile. We can. We've done more complicated things before, haven't we? He laughed softly, the sound carrying a rare ease. We have. True. Their conversation quickly shifted to the details, coordinating schedules, recruiting additional volunteers, ensuring proper transportation for the mobile library, and finalizing the curriculum for the workshops. The more they planned, the more their individual skills complemented one another. Elena's meticulous organization balanced Alexander's strategic foresight. Her empathy guided their initiatives, while his resources and connections enabled them to scale their vision. Together, they began transforming the nonprofit from a fledgling idea into a tangible, impactful presence in the community. By mid-morning, they were interrupted by a delivery of books from a generous publisher. Alexander and Elena worked side by side, unpacking boxes, checking titles, and sorting them by age group and reading level. As they lifted the heaviest boxes together, their hands occasionally brushed, eliciting a quiet awareness that had become familiar yet still thrilling. Neither commented, but the small gestures, the shared laughter when a box nearly toppled, the unspoken reassurance in a glance, added depth to their bond. Later, they met with a group of volunteers in the main room, discussing upcoming events and delegating responsibilities. Elena's presence was calming, her encouragement genuine, while Alexander's quiet authority ensured the group felt guided and supported. After the meeting, they stayed behind to review the feedback from last month's mobile library visits. The kids loved the new story selection, Elena said, flipping through the notes. Some of them even started recommending books to each other. I never thought children could become such enthusiastic critics. Alexander chuckled, shaking his head. It's the passion you ignite in them. That's what makes the difference. Not just the books themselves, but how you make them feel while reading. She looked at him, a subtle warmth in her gaze. And you make it possible. Without your support, none of this would exist. The acknowledgement made Alexander pause, a mix of pride and humility crossing his features. We make it possible together, he corrected softly. Their collaboration extended beyond logistical planning. As the weeks passed, they brainstormed innovative ways to reach underserved communities. They coordinated with local schools, libraries, and community centers, identifying gaps in access and devising creative solutions. They even designed a small mobile app for volunteers to track book deliveries and upcoming events, which became an unexpected success. Despite the heavy workload, Elena and Alexander found moments to connect personally, though subtly. A shared lunch, a quiet walk through the neighborhood, a brief conversation about a book or an article that inspired them. Each moment, while seemingly ordinary, reinforced the trust and understanding they had cultivated. The foundation of their relationship had grown from the first cautious interactions to a bond strengthened by shared vision and mutual respect. One afternoon, as they drove the mobile library to a small rural town, the rain began to fall in steady sheets. The roads were slick, the sky gray and low, but their spirits remained undampened. They navigated narrow streets and winding lanes, delivering books and setting up pop-up reading stations. Children gathered quickly, their laughter echoing through the small park where they had arranged benches and tents. Elena knelt beside a young girl holding a worn picture book, guiding her through the story and gently correcting her pronunciation. Alexander observed, assisting other children and helping them choose titles that matched their reading level. As the rain lightly misted their jackets, the two exchanged occasional glances, each silently acknowledging the joy in the moment. After the children had departed, Elena and Alexander lingered in the park, the mobile library packed away. The air was fresh, the scent of wet earth filling their senses. You know, Alexander said quietly, I've always believed in doing something meaningful, but I never realized how much more fulfilling it could be when shared with someone who truly understands why it matters. Elena smiled, her fingers brushing his as she picked up a damp leaf from the ground. It's not just understanding, she replied. It's trust, knowing that no matter what happens, we can rely on each other. That makes all the difference. That evening, back at the office, they reviewed the week's accomplishments and began mapping out the next month. Plans for additional workshops, community outreach programs, and expansion of the mobile library were discussed at length. Each decision required careful consideration, Yet the process was invigorating, a testament to the strength of their partnership. Later, alone in the office as the lights dimmed, Alexander looked at Elena, the quiet hum of the city outside filtering through the windows. "Elena," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I need you to know something. This foundation, these programs, they mean more because you're here. Not just as a partner in work, but as someone I trust completely. Someone I care about." Elena met his gaze, her chest tightening with a mix of emotions, gratitude, affection, and the lingering caution of past disappointments. She reached out, placing her hand over his. "I know," she whispered, "and I care too. But more than that, I want us to keep building, to keep helping others. Whatever happens between us, this work comes first. Always." Alexander nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Their relationship was not defined solely by emotion. It was forged in action, responsibility, and shared purpose. The foundation of trust, respect, and mutual commitment was stronger than fleeting passion or superficial attachment. As the weeks turned into months, the Hug Foundation continued to grow. The mobile library reached new towns, volunteer recruitment expanded, and more community members became involved in workshops and reading programs. Each success reinforced the connection between Elena and Alexander, not just as colleagues or friends, but as partners in a mission that transcended personal gain. Through challenges and triumphs, moments of doubt and flashes of triumph, they learned to navigate life together, step by step. Each obstacle faced, each problem solved, each child inspired, reinforced their understanding that true partnership required patience, communication, and unwavering support. By the end of the part, the two stood on the balcony of the office, overlooking the quiet streets, the city bathed in the golden glow of late afternoon. Elena leaned against the railing, Alexander at her side, their hands brushing lightly. "This," Alexander said, gesturing toward the city below, "all of this, it's just the beginning." Elena nodded, a calm certainty in her expression. "Yes, and we'll face it together." Together, they watched as the day faded into evening, the lights of Portland twinkling like stars below, a symbol not just of the city they were serving, but of the new life and purpose they were building together, hand in hand. The morning light filtered through the wide windows of the Hug Foundation office, casting long, soft shadows across stacks of books, folders, and volunteer schedules. Elena arrived first, balancing a thermos of coffee and a notebook brimming with notes from the latest outreach programs. Alexander followed moments later, carrying his laptop and a small package of supplies for the mobile library. The atmosphere was calm, but beneath it, an undercurrent of tension lingered. "Morning," Alexander said, setting his bag down. He paused, noticing the furrow in Elena's brow. "You look like you didn't sleep well." Elena sighed, placing the thermos on her desk. "I didn't. We've got a funding shortfall for the new women's workshop series, and some of our volunteers are double booked. If we can't solve it quickly, we might have to postpone." Her voice carried both determination and worry. Alexander leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "We can't postpone. Not after all the momentum we've built. Let's break it down. What exactly do we need to cover?" They went through the numbers, volunteer schedules, and resources, mapping out every detail. Elena suggested reallocating some of the staff from the mobile library for a temporary period while new volunteers were trained. Alexander contacted donors personally, explaining the urgency and vision for the new programs. By mid-morning, a sense of cautious optimism settled over them. As the day progressed, the challenges intensified. A delivery truck carrying the mobile library books broke down en route to a rural community. Volunteers called in sick, leaving gaps in coverage. Meanwhile, a key donor requested a detailed progress report before releasing additional funds. Elena felt her chest tighten under the weight of responsibilities. Alexander noticed her growing tension and placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Elena, we've handled chaos before. Let's not lose sight of why we started this." Her eyes softened at his words. "I know. It's just sometimes it feels like the city itself is testing us." He smiled, the quiet confidence she had come to rely on radiating from him. "Then we'll pass the test. Together." By mid-afternoon, they split tasks. Elena stayed at the office coordinating volunteers and reviewing the curriculum for the workshops, while Alexander took to the streets, supervising the delivery and ensuring that the mobile library reached the waiting children. Each phone call, each quick meeting, each challenge reinforced the depth of their collaboration. Despite the hurdles, there were moments of quiet triumph. In one small town, a boy who had struggled with reading finally completed a book on his own. His grin was wide and triumphant as he waved the book at Elena, who knelt beside him, pride glowing on her face. "You did it," she whispered. "I knew you could." Alexander watched from a distance, noting the way Elena's encouragement inspired the children. The simple act of belief had a ripple effect, and it reminded him why all the obstacles mattered so little in comparison to the impact they were making. Later, back at the office, they debriefed the day's events. The staff and volunteers gathered around, exhausted but energized by the successes. They reviewed what went well and what needed improvement. Each setback was met with practical solutions rather than blame, reinforcing the culture of trust and teamwork that Elena and Alexander had fostered from the start. As evening approached, a long-standing challenge emerged. One of the women participating in the workshop series had a personal crisis that threatened to derail her progress. Elena and Alexander worked side by side, speaking with her gently, helping her navigate resources and finding a way to ensure she could continue without losing momentum. The experience left them both emotionally drained but deeply fulfilled. Alexander looked at Elena, his expression a mixture of admiration and something deeper, an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond they had forged through trials. "You know," he said softly, "I don't think I could do this without you." Elena met his gaze, her heart tightening. "And I wouldn't want to do it without you. We complement each other, Alex. We always have." That night, as the office emptied and the city's quiet settled over them, they stayed behind, reviewing long-term strategies. They mapped out plans for additional outreach, partnerships with schools, and potential funding sources. Every chart, every plan, every detail strengthened not only the foundation but their shared vision for the future. Amid the hard work, subtle moments of connection persisted. A shared cup of coffee, the brush of hands while sorting papers, quiet laughter over a misprinted flyer. Each instance, small yet intimate, reminded them of the bond that had grown stronger over months of collaboration. The following weekend, they organized a large community event, a combined mobile library visit and literacy workshop in one of Portland's underserved neighborhoods. Hundreds of families arrived, and volunteers worked tirelessly to ensure that each child and parent received attention, books, and guidance. The event was a resounding success, though not without challenges: a sudden downpour, a shortage of books, and a volunteer calling in sick. Yet Elena and Alexander navigated the difficulties with calm determination, their synergy evident in every decision. By the day's end, exhausted but exhilarated, they watched the children leave with new books clutched tightly in small hands. Parents expressed gratitude, some with tears in their eyes, sharing stories of how even a single book could spark curiosity and hope. Elena turned to Alexander, her own eyes reflecting the same emotion. "We did it," she whispered. He nodded, a small, satisfied smile forming. "We did, and it's only the beginning." Later, as they walked through the quiet streets back to their office, Oliver toddled between them, holding a small picture book. The rain had stopped, leaving the world refreshed and glistening under the early evening sky. Elena and Alexander exchanged a glance, unspoken words flowing between them, gratitude, pride, and an understanding that they had weathered storms together, both literally and metaphorically. That night, at the office, they stayed late to organize supplies and plan for the upcoming week. Exhaustion weighed on their shoulders, but it was the satisfying kind that comes from meaningful work. Alexander paused, looking at Elena, whose brow furrowed in concentration over a spreadsheet. "Do you realize," he said quietly, "how far we've come?" She looked up, a faint smile on her lips. "Every day? And yet, I feel like the best is still ahead." He nodded. "Agreed. And we'll face it together. No matter what." The trials of the past weeks, the logistical nightmares, and the personal challenges had forged something stronger than either of them could have anticipated. A partnership built on trust, shared purpose, and deep, unspoken affection. As they finally left the office that night, the city lights reflecting in puddles on the street, both felt a quiet certainty that they were ready for whatever came next. Outside, the city slept under a blanket of stars, unaware of the quiet triumph taking place in a small office at the heart of Portland. Elena and Alexander walked hand in hand, their steps synchronized, their hearts aligned. They had faced trials, yes, but the triumphs, both big and small, had been theirs to claim together. And as the first glimmers of dawn appeared on the horizon, they knew their journey was far from over. The Hug Foundation was not just surviving, it was thriving. And so were they, as partners, as friends, as co-creators of a future that stretched beyond themselves, into the communities they had touched and the countless lives they had yet to reach. The morning sun spilled golden light across Portland, illuminating the alley behind St. Mary's Church. Once a dark and forgotten corner of the city, it now glimmered with vibrant murals depicting books, open hands, and messages of hope. Elena stood at the entrance of the alley, adjusting the small stack of notes she planned to pin to the kindness wall. Alexander approached, carrying Oliver in his arms, the boy clutching a well-loved picture book. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Elena turned to him, her smile radiant. "As ready as I'll ever be. It's not just an event, it's a symbol. For everything we've built, everything we've overcome." The alley soon buzzed with the energy of hundreds of volunteers, families, and children. Stalls were lined with books, hot coffee from Stumptown, and donuts from Voodoo. The mobile library, freshly stocked, gleamed under the morning light, a beacon for curious minds. Elena and Alexander moved through the crowd seamlessly, guiding volunteers, checking schedules, and sharing quiet smiles in between brief interactions. A little girl tugged at Elena's sleeve, holding a picture book she had just received. "Thank you for bringing these books," she said shyly. Elena knelt down, taking her hands. "You're welcome. Remember, these books are yours to explore, and every story can take you somewhere amazing." Alexander watched from nearby, Oliver's tiny fingers wrapped around his own. He whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "We've done it, haven't we?" Elena glanced at him, the light catching in her eyes. "We have, but it's not about the end, it's about the journey. Every child we reach, every person we help, that's the point." As the day progressed, moments of triumph continued to unfold. A boy who had struggled with reading finally sounded out a sentence aloud with confidence, his classmates cheering him on. A mother in the Women's Center shared her story of finding courage after a personal crisis, hugging Elena tightly before stepping into the next chapter of her life. Volunteers exchanged stories of small victories, laughter mingling with the gentle hum of the community gathering. At noon, a brief pause allowed Elena and Alexander to step aside. Oliver crawled onto the soft grass, giggling as he chased after a stray balloon. Alexander took her hands, feeling the weight of everything they had endured together. "Do you remember the first day we met?" he asked, his voice a quiet mixture of nostalgia and reverence. Elena nodded, her mind's eye drifting back to that rainy night, to a hug that had started it all. "I was scared, uncertain. I didn't know if helping you would change anything. But it did. It changed everything." Alexander smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "And it wasn't just me you saved. You've saved so many, including me." The afternoon unfolded into a series of small, yet profound moments. Volunteers pinned notes to the kindness wall, each one carrying a personal message of encouragement, hope, or gratitude. Children read aloud in the mobile library, parents listened and laughed, and even strangers stopped by to leave their mark on Hug Alley. The air was thick with joy, purpose, and the undeniable feeling that something remarkable had been created. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, Elena and Alexander found themselves at the center of the alley. Oliver slept soundly in a stroller, a small blanket tucked around him. The murals glowed softly in the evening light, each one a testament to creativity, compassion, and resilience. Alexander took Elena's hand, his thumb brushing gently across hers. "We started with a single hug," he said. "And now, look at this." She looked around, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "It's more than I ever imagined. It's not just our story anymore. It belongs to everyone who needed it, everyone we've touched." He pulled her into a hug, this one different from the first. Firm, grounding, and filled with the knowledge of all they had faced together. "And it's just the beginning," he whispered. "The first chapter of a much bigger story." Elena rested her head against his shoulder, listening to the rhythmic beat of his heart, feeling the warmth of their shared journey. "Then let's make sure every chapter matters," she replied softly. The evening drew on, and as volunteers began packing up and families returned home, Elena and Alexander remained, walking slowly through the alley, taking in the notes fluttering in the gentle breeze. Each message, each drawing, each heartfelt word was a reminder of the ripple effect of kindness. They paused near the mural of an open book with two hands embracing, a symbol they had designed together. Alexander knelt slightly to Oliver's level, pointing at the mural. "One day, this will all be yours too, and you'll help continue it." Oliver reached out, his tiny fingers brushing the painted hands, giggling. Elena watched, her heart full. "It's a legacy of love," she whispered. Night fell, and the alley was bathed in soft, solar-powered light. The city around them quieted, but the energy of Hug Alley lingered, an enduring promise to those who had touched it and those who would come. Elena and Alexander sat on a bench, watching their son sleep, their hands intertwined. "I never imagined we'd get here," Elena said finally. Alexander squeezed her hand, a gentle but firm reminder of their shared strength. "We did, because we faced everything together. The trials, the doubts, the fears, and we turned them into triumphs. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solidity of him beside her. Here's to every hug that started it, every person who believed, and every life we've touched. And to the ones we haven't met yet, Alexander added, lifting his gaze to the starry sky. They sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing the enormity of their journey, the quiet power of love, and the beauty of purpose realized. Hug Alley was no longer just an alley. It was a testament to human connection, resilience, and the belief that one act of kindness could indeed change everything. As they finally rose to leave, Oliver nestled between them. They knew that the story they had started with a single hug would continue, expanding, inspiring, and carrying forward the legacy of compassion. And in that certainty, they found peace, fulfillment, and a love that had been tested, proven, and made unshakable. The city slept beneath a canopy of stars, but in that small corner, the heart of Portland beat brighter than ever, echoing a message for anyone who would listen, that love, courage, and kindness could transform even the smallest gesture into a life-changing act. Elena, Alexander, and Oliver walked hand in hand through the alley, leaving the world behind only for a moment, knowing that their story, now intertwined with countless others, would continue to grow, one hug at a time. And as the moonlight touched the murals, one could almost imagine the whispers of gratitude from those whose lives had been touched, carried on the wind like a soft, enduring promise that every act of love matters, every connection heals, and every beginning can lead to an extraordinary journey. Thank you for listening to the story. Write your thoughts in the comments.